Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. I'm here with Patrick.
Hi.
Oh my goodness. Hello. So today we are going to discuss the question, when will my spouse get over my betrayal? But within that, we're going to talk about what goes into that, which Patrick sort of brought this up the other day. He's like, I really want to talk about what I consider to be living amends. So when you think about someone, quote unquote, getting over something, what you're really doing is asking, like, how can I make amends with somebody? And when I talk to just for clarification, when I talk to my betrayed partners, I say, we never get over it. We can move through it. So we're going to talk a little bit about this question today. And I thought what might be a nice place to start is with a basic definition of, making amends. And so if you do a quick Google search, Merriam-Webster, online Google, it says definition of amends or making amends is to do something to correct a mistake that one has made or a bad situation that one has caused. I think that's pretty clear and it's pretty good for what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But I think in order to answer that question, how do I correct a mistake that one has made? And actually, I want to pause there for just a second, because when we hear the question, when will my spouse get over my betrayal? Or when will my spouse get over it? Or my spouse is stuck in her healing, or what can I do to help her heal? Or any of those questions or any variation of that. A lot of times if you hear the phrasing of that, it's focused on the other person, and we can never control the other person. The only thing we ever have control of is our own behavior. So when you reframe it into the idea of, how can I make amends? How can I rebuild trust? How can I gain connection? How can I provide safety? You have so much more to act on, right, and to move forward with. And by the way, when you're focused on those things, if she's going to move through, if she's going to get to the point of safety and reconciliation, those are the things that are going to help.
Right.
So I like the definition. So to do something to correct a mistake that one has made or a bad situation one has caused. So I was having a conversation with a client fairly recently, and I think her spouse was going through the SA steps. And one of them, as with any addiction recovery, one of the steps is generally some version or variation of making amends, mm-hmm. Reaching out to people that have been impacted by your behavior, by your addiction. And so we just had a conversation kind of around that a little shortly. That was basically like, when it's friends or family or someone that's a little separated from you, that may truly look like one conversation or one letter or whatever it is, mm-hmm. Based on the situation where you are taking responsibility and apologizing for how you hurt somebody. But that's not necessarily what it looks like when you're talking about making amends with the person you're married to.
Right.
And that is more what you have defined as living amends, because it's an ongoing process. It's not going to be something that, a spouse can say, I'm sorry, I hurt you, and I take full responsibility, and then that's that.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the other things I was thinking about too is when we talk about living amends, you have to recognize that how well you do living amends may not impact the status of your relationship. So, that partner may still leave you, right? But you can still continue. Sometimes if there's kids in the situation or whatever, you can make living amends by being present and available and all of those things. And if somebody's mad, you go, yeah, I did it, and so like there's a great podcast out there and they talk in there about how family members have reacted to his betrayal and what he did. And I think this is a good example of kind of a great mindset mindset that leads you into living amends is he goes, well, people have a hard time reacting and knowing what to do and what to say because it's something I did. It's not like he doesn't criticize other people's reaction to things because he still accepts the responsibility of, hey, I put our entire family into this weird situation and nobody really knows. Nobody's doing it perfectly on reacting to it, but it's something that I've caused. So I need to make sure that I continue to create a space where people can actually move through that because it was so devastating. It wasn't just a betrayal to the spouse, but it was the in-laws and the kids and these situations that all the family members have a hard time reacting to. Mm-hmm. So, I think when it comes to and I've said this before, is I think you have, by being able to accept responsibility and take efforts to provide a high degree of emotional safety or validation of someone's feelings and whatever they're going through, a trigger or something like that, it is like a real gift that you can give afterwards, because you can't change your behavior. It's done. You can't change it. You'd love to change it, but you can't. So what you can do, though, like you were saying, is you can show up and you can say, hey, I understand you're triggered by this. Do you want me to change the channel? Or maybe next time we don't watch this? Or what do you think about this? Or whatever. And really kind of taking into account that person's feelings through the path of healing, which is not a short one. It's not a short one at all. It 3 to 5 to 7 years, whatever that may be, with some triggers along the way, right? And stuff like that.
I sort of, with the betrayed partner, take the timeline off in the extent of the trauma aspect. And I think part of the question of when will somebody, quote unquote, get over something, if you hear it in that specific language, I think part of that is a fundamental lack of understanding of trauma and how it impacts people. Now, not every single betrayed partner has significant trauma, but a high percentage of them do. And so what you hear in questions like that, where it's like, well, I want this to be done now, I'm sober, why not? Why isn't somebody like happy to see me at the end of the day? I think it's just a real lack of understanding of how it has impacted the betrayed partner. So deep healing. And on the betrayed partner side, I also want to say that, yes, 3 to 5 years, when you're talking about like, I do all the work, I've engaged in healing, I'm communicating my emotions, I communicate my triggers, we've provided safety for each other, we do all these things, right? You could do everything right and still a few years down the road have a trigger. So I always want to like clarify the trauma aspect of it, because when you are working on healing and you get into real recovery, you can live a very happy, healthy, normal life as a couple, and that's you've done everything, quote unquote, right. That doesn't necessarily erase the fact that something traumatizing has happened to you. And if you are one of the people that does experience it as a significant trauma, it's important for the spouse to understand like that aspect to it, I think, because when something is truly a trauma in your life, people that have experienced these things, you go 20 years and you remember that thing happened to you. And, you might see something on TV and it kind of pulls that up a little bit. And we've talked about this a little bit in the context of when I talk to people about how does that change as you navigate healing, your nervous system feels safer. A trigger can still come up. A thought or a fear or an insecurity can still come up. Your reaction becomes smaller. It goes away much more quickly. You guys maybe have learned how to communicate it effectively and create support around that. That's what healing looks like. And so I just want to clarify that, because I think sometimes when we hear questions like this and we think, oh, I'm going to make amends, we're going to reconcile, when does somebody, quote unquote, get over it, whatever the variation of that question is, it's almost like there's an expectation that if we do a certain amount of work, then this thing never happened or we never revisit it. And that we want to promote healing and we want to promote freedom for both individuals, but that in reality does not actually mean we never have a conversation about this ever again. That's not what that looks like. And we don't ever want to give that impression that means that like you do all the healing work, you're living a happy life 5 years down the road, and then year 6 comes around and something is triggering for the betrayed partner, and all of a sudden you've done something wrong. No, that's just trauma. That's how trauma works.
Yeah. I was, as you were telling that story, I think about that. I got in that really bad car accident 19 years ago, and I've actually processed through it and done some brain spotting and things on the trauma of that. But occasionally I still will be like, wow, like it'll still hit me of how devastating that was. Mm-hmm. Now I've really worked through it. It's just a memory that'll come up and be like, wow, that was, so yeah. And that's been 19 years, mm-hmm. So it's been a long, long time.
Yeah. And I think what ended up ironically kind of helping you heal and recover through that was when we went through our recovery and you ended up working with a professional to help you deal with some of that mm-hmm. trauma and that pain.
Right.
And so it does take, I think, to also clarify within this conversation, I do think all of this takes intentional work.
Right.
For sure. Because what we see is if people are not either side, the addicted or the betrayed, if they are not intentionally and proactively working on their own healing and kind of taking action on these areas, the brain is going to continue choosing coping mechanisms and comfort.
Right.
For both people, and that just looks different, mm-hmm. but it's the same process essentially. And your brain is always going to try to protect you. It's always going to try to find comfort. It's always going to try to find safety, and that may not always logically look like the way we want it. Which is why when we find out that we're living into these patterns that we don't like, or regular mental patterns or thought patterns or emotional patterns or whatever it is, or behavioral patterns, that's why like the intentionality of working with somebody to kind of, like you mentioned, brain spotting is a great example. And we've mentioned EMDR, we've mentioned subconscious reprogramming and stuff that I do. There's a bunch of different things out there, but that's the stuff that kind of helps you actually process those. And so that's where I think that's an important clarification too. So time and also the intentionality to diminish the emotional trigger itself. Mm-hmm. So to answer the question of when will my spouse get over my betrayal, or how do I make living amends? One of the things I think that it's important to ask is, well, what does betrayal feel like? Because if you're thinking about making amends for somebody, it's like, well, maybe understanding where they're coming from is going to be helpful in that process. So I can answer that question, and I'm sure every betrayed partner will answer differently, but I think what might be more helpful, because we're talking from the addicted partner's perspective and from their perspective of making amends, I'll have you answer that question of what do you think betrayal feels like?
Well, I think it feels like a lot of things, but I think, getting the rug pulled out from under you, every sense of what you felt was reality. In so many ways, the relationship, the safety, maybe your financial situation is all wrong. So you had an incomplete picture because you trusted, and it turns out the positive view that you had of the relationship was completely false. And so in that, you're trying to find, if you're choosing to stay, you're trying to find, okay, what do I start to rely on now? What is actually true? What can I rely on? And that's why it takes time, because there may be one little small thing. I can trust the way he puts on his shirt, and that's it. And then over time, it builds and it builds and it builds, but it takes a long time because you've been what you believed your world was not.
Yeah. Well, you question literally everything, right. And the brain really starts flipping through the decades or the years or the months or the weeks or whatever, the different events, the photo albums, all of the memories. And it tries to make sense of, because it had created a tapestry and a picture of one reality. And upon discovery, it's like pulling a thread and the tapestry just completely dissolves. So then as you're navigating this new phase, your brain is going, okay, what thread was real? What wasn't? I saw blue here. Was it actually purple? It's in the picture that created the tapestry in the end. That picture wasn't real.
Right.
It wasn't accurate. So then it's like, how do I take all of these pieces of thread and put them back together in a way that makes sense? And it's incredibly overwhelming, and you're questioning every stitch, or, however you might phrase that. And so it's very, very overwhelming. And you mentioned looking for patterns, and that's very true. Every betrayed partner, consciously or subconsciously, is looking for patterns to trust. That's why we really hit on like consistency plus time. And you really, really see this, because what I've noticed is even if it's not about an acting out behavior specifically, but if it's a behavior or a pattern that parallels something closely enough within the addiction, or the emotional pattern that they associated with the addiction, or any of those things, the betrayed partner's brain is so hyper aware, and they've done so much analyzing of what contributed to or what was associated with the acting out. Mm-hmm. So if there is any type of pattern interrupt during recovery, their brain is going to cue that as a red flag. You have to now analyze this and think, can I trust this? Does this mean they're acting out? Are they hiding something? That's the level of intensity. And that only diminishes over time with intentional work. If that was to be shoved under the rug, not talked about, if the partner was not engaging in healing activities and getting into sobriety, then that level of hyperactivity in the brain could potentially stay very high for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So that's why we hit on safety so much. Yeah.
I think it's a really good point about being very consistent in that, because it I think you got to the point where you knew exactly what my positive, safe routine was. Mm-hmm. And because I was so consistent with it through all those days, it wasn't spotty here. And I always went to group. I always did all those things. And so, like
right now, if you like missed a group and I didn't know about it, and I found out like a week later, I'd be like, something is horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
My world would like come crashing down. I'd be like, what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'd be so out of the room. So I think, so making amends, I think one of the important things to consider when you're thinking about how do I do that is going to be answering the question, well, how did I make that person feel? Right. So if you don't think you can fully grasp how your partner's feeling, or you don't feel like you could sit down and truly explain in a way that you understand, or that somebody else can understand how betrayal feels, then that would be step number one. But beyond that would be like, okay, I've hurt this person. This is how it feels to them. This is their lived experience. This is what the trauma is like for them. Understanding, okay, then what actually helps somebody to recover from betrayal? And again, I always word it as moving through, not getting over.
Right.
So what would help a betrayed partner moving through recovery? And we don't have to hit on all of these super deeply. I'm sure there might be an episode for all of these already, but safety, trust, communication, and time. Over and over and over. Safety, trust, communication, and time. So if we can understand how we've made somebody feel, and then we understand what allows them to heal, safety is going to take a lot of effort, a lot of communication. Trust is going to take a lot of consistency. Communication has to get deeper and deeper, and on both sides, be really open. And time, because time plays those other three out. Yeah. When we were just talking about the patterns and the rituals and the behaviors and
I think communication, of the four you listed, communication is the hardest one, because somebody could stop acting out, right? Boom. So they're done. And then you can trust them. And then if they don't act out for 4 or 5 years, right, then great. It's awesome. But the communication, being able to speak, I think that's what you see people still struggling with. And technically, the deeper you move into healing, you actually should become a better communicator. I think those two things will go hand in hand. You're able to receive.
There'd be like a fancy order, but just that you can name and communicate your feelings better. That you can tap into like
you react to maybe some stressful situations in a more positive way with more empathy. And so I think that one is probably the one that takes the most work, because a lot of folks, they're done with the behavior. A lot of folks will get to that point where they're done with the behavior relatively quickly, and they have the good guardrails and all that stuff, and it's locked in. But it's like, how do you communicate? How do you communicate when your wife gets triggered? How do you communicate when you're tired and your wife gets triggered? How do you communicate when you guys are having a great day and then she gets triggered and it drops?
Well, to that point, I actually think that's when a lot of this, that's a good example of like, I think when a lot of times this question comes up. I'm doing all the work. I've gotten into sobriety very quickly.
Right.
I'm really working hard. I'm building trust. I'm providing safety. Why isn't she healed yet?
Right.
Or, why aren't we moving forward yet? Right.
Yeah.
The answer is, also the time piece, time.
Mhm.
And again, I would say maybe 8 out of 10 situations, if your heart is in the right place, you're doing all of these steps, you're getting into true recovery, not just sobriety, you're empathetic, you're doing all these things, 8 out of 10 times, then that relationship is going to have a healthy reconciliation. Maybe 2 out of the 10 might still end up in separation. But did I say separation the first time or reconciliation?
You know what I mean?
8 out of 10 times reconciliation, 2 out of 10 separation, or staying together, but just never really reconciling,
right,
and being very unhappy. But look at you've already done the right thing either way.
Yeah.
So it's focusing on, again, it's the me piece. For the betrayed partner, we have to focus on our boundaries, what we need for safety, communicating that clearly, making sure we are learning about our addicted partner's mindset, how, participating as a couple in the relationship, right? So on both sides, but neither side can ever control the other partner.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So how does betrayal feel? Understanding what helps, that's going to kind of play into the answer. And I saw a meme the other day, and I shared this in my Recover You group. It had 3 little cartoon characters or drawings, but it said, live by these 3 rules. Love needs action and communication. Trust needs proof and consistency. Apologies need changed behavior. So I thought that was really appropriate for this conversation, because it's like, well, how do I make amends? You're 2 months into sobriety, but the partner has been betrayed for 10 years. It's nobody's gonna be healed in that period of time. They're still looking at the pile of thread on the floor, trying to figure out what color is what color, much less having to try to sew it back together at this point. That's just not, the timeline doesn't fit up. And part of that is because an apology and taking responsibility is only one piece of it. You have to see the changed behavior play out consistently over time. I mean, how many times have you been in a relationship with someone just over the course of your life where maybe they don't have a consistent behavior with you? And so then you become very gun shy. And then after so many times, they're being really positive and you're having a lot of positive interactions, but you go, I don't really know if I can trust that person. With spousal betrayal and infidelity, you only need one time.
Yeah.
You don't even need a pattern. It's just that destruction, that massive blow up of your world. And then there's a lot of standing back and watching from the betrayed partner side of, can I trust you? I see what you're doing, but can I trust you? And that's why time and the patterning and the consistency and the sincerity is so important to know that it's true.
Yeah.
So maybe we can give some examples specifically. We've talked about understanding the betrayed side. We've talked about timing, and let's talk about what does, your concept of living an amends or living amends. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think the first one is do what you say you're going to do. So if the reason I often, and you've done a nice job talking about, hey, it's what you can do, is I think this will probably resonate with a lot of betrayed spouses, is no, you're not going to get a gold medal because you didn't cheat on me today, right? That's kind of a common refrain. I think I've heard it. You said it. I've heard of a lot of other wives have said it. But so that's why it's important for you just to continue to do what you say you're going to do. If you get up at 5 and you journal, or if you get up at 5 and you go to the gym or whatever, and those are the things you say you're going to do, or if you say, hey, I'm going to call you when I leave work so you know where I'm at, or hey, if I'm on a business trip and I'm going to do, whatever these rules, do what you say you're going to do. Absolutely do that. Follow through on that. And if there's a change, be as proactive as you can be. So we had there was a little situation in my job. I've always made a commitment, and actually this was before discovery too, is I never put myself into a situation with just me and a female employee, right? And so like driving in a car, going on a business trip, whatever.
Doors open or windows in the doors.
Yeah. So we always do the right thing. And so I actually, without going into too much detail, but basically there was a business situation that came up, was kind of quick. I was on a business trip. It was a very short drive, like 15 minutes. And there was a woman in the car with me. And so there was a specific business need that it appeared that it came about. And it kind of took me by, it didn't take me by surprise, but the situation's quick. I knew it would resolve it. In my own mind, I was like, okay, we got to do this. I'll call Kylene right away.
Yeah. So basically, like someone came to you and said, hey, can I ride from point A to point B with you? So
to brief you on this personnel situation.
So you didn't initiate it. They initiated. It was very short. It was like around other people. You were going from one place with people to another place with people. There was really no, not that you would do anything, but there's really no opportunity or anything like that. So what ended up happening was, because we're talking about doing what you're saying you're going to do, years ago, we had some agreements around this type of stuff. So, everyone should always operate under the assumption that the agreements are permanent unless you verbally discuss things. And so when he told me, I wasn't necessarily I wasn't upset that, you had made the decision itself, the behavior itself didn't bother me because I understood the context. I understood that it wasn't an issue, right? And no problem in terms of the context. What I brought up to talk to you about was what I didn't like was the retroactive communication to me that was happening instead of the proactive communication or check in with me real quick so that I knew while or before it was happening. So what in your mind, what was happening was it was real fast. You decided it was safe. But what bothered me was you decided without me when it was something that we had agreed as a safety thing.
Right.
So that was just a conversation that we had kind of around making sure that we're always proactive. We continue to be proactive about that stuff and don't ever make a decision about changing something without talking about it. So really the only thing that I think would have been different is that the text or the phone call happened before you got in the car versus letting me know that it happened after.
And just as part of that story, I had made a commitment, right at the point to call you as soon as I could, right? As soon as and so I did do that. And you had actually said, hey, that does make me feel better that you called right away and didn't hide it because there was no way that you could have verified that that happened or not. So I called you. Mm-hmm. But then I also was like, hey, how would you have liked me to have handled that differently? Because I didn't want to. And then I actually felt bad because I had dropped a little bit of your sense of safety. And I think I actually felt it deeper than you did. It kind of bothered me for about 12 hours. I was like, darn it, and stuff like that. So, but it was good because it's a good example of you can't think through every situation in your life that sometimes weird things come up, you know what I mean? And so you just, I think for me, it would have been a pause real quick, send a quick text.
Yeah, because I would have even, I think I said this, I would have even appreciated, even if you were telling me instead of asking me proactively, hey, this is what's happening. I just wanted to keep you in the loop.
Right.
As you were getting in the car type situation, as opposed to hey, this happened. That was the disconnect for me.
Yeah.
So, so that was a good conversation to have to sort of reiterate again, the safety.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I guess another positive example, where something did go right. So I've made the commitment to not turn the TV on in hotel rooms. Mm-hmm. So a couple weekends ago, my son and I were traveling. He wanted to watch some football. I reached out to you, said, hey, you cool with this? He's going to turn the TV on. So he turned the TV on, right? And so we watched some football, but then he had to leave the room for something really quick. And I just turned the TV off. I didn't call you, say, is it okay? I didn't leave it on. I just turned it off because it was well, that's not the agreement. What you understand the agreement to be is that we're both in the room.
Right.
And once again, there was going to be no acting out. There's going to be no, neither one of these situations had anything to do with inappropriate behavior.
Actually really good examples, because this is where I think an addict partner who has not acted out in a really long time could get really, you could see impatience or irritation with these specific examples. Well, why would that be an issue? I'm not going to do anything wrong. Or you said that I could have the TV on because our son was in the room, he left for 5 minutes and came back. What did you think I was going to do? Right? It's not about that. It's about doing what you're saying you're going to do, communicating if that changes, and making sure you're asking your partner what helps them feel safe. Because I think one misunderstanding when you're talking about the implications of betrayal after this stuff is that when we start over, we're starting at ground zero. But the reality is, like, if you look at an explosion or whatever, you have like this gap, right? Like this huge, like the building has not just flattened on the street. You're like 100 feet down, or, however you want to view that. So your relationship is the same way. You guys have been building this 50-foot skyscraper or 50-story skyscraper, right? And I don't know, is that small for a skyscraper? 100-story skyscraper?
Well,
Okay. I don't. But you guys, your whole relationship has been building the skyscraper. You just demolished it in an instant, and it didn't just go back to zero. It went to negative, and you have to know that. So when you're talking about 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, living amends, it's not all about not doing the behavior. It's about creating that safety and making sure your partner, where are they in that rebuild? And how do you help them feel safe?
Right. It actually has very little to do with the behavior at that point.
Yeah.
Because like if you think about, and I don't want to send a wrong message here, the thing that's so devastating about betrayal is the manipulation, the deceit,
the shock,
the cover-ups, the gaslighting. I think in a lot of cases, and I'm not in any way saying that the behavior is, but the behavior is almost like it's,
the behavior is traumatizing.
it is traumatizing, but all that other stuff, it's like, well, you didn't even care enough to tell me the truth.
Right.
You didn't care enough
building a relationship back requires trust. And so people get really stuck less on the behavior and more on, can I trust you because you lied to me? So what you're saying is it's a more long-term sticking point than the behavior itself.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, they're both horrible.
Yeah.
Okay. So then making living amends looks like, 1, do what you say you're going to do. And we just talked about that. 2, reaffirming safety.
Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to reaffirm safety through the year. So a good example for us, we do an annual polygraph, right? And so I don't know if we'll always do that, but that's a good check for you that says, okay, well, he's going to go sit in a chair and answer some questions. It's a tough event, right? It's not an easy go down and have an ice cream cone event. I mean, it's not a fun event. And so, but it gives you that sense of I'm reaffirming safety through the years. The other thing would be is don't, like we are actually listening to, or we talked about something today where like, hey, can we ever get to the point where you don't look at my phone again? Like, that's not a really smart thing to do, right? You're like,
I don't think that wasn't a conversation between you and me. It was like an abstract conversation we were having, right?
It was actually about, hey, I have a room, it's my private space, and right. It's a story, about betrayal and all this.
I heard, and then we were discussing the concept of couples going, hey, we have things that the other person doesn't have access to, and how much we just think that is wrong, and it breeds the potential for all of these other things that we work with, right? Betrayal and addiction and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, it's never healthy to say I'm in a permanent long-term marriage relationship with someone and I'm keeping secrets in any way, or you don't have access to my email, you don't have access to my money, you don't have access to, or a bank account, or you don't have access to, unless it's an agreement, right? But even then it depends on what it is. A lot of times it's not.
So there's a, like you brought up some really good ones. Access to communications, where a lot of guys stumble, where actually a lot of human beings stumble is in the whole, social media and emails and texts and stuff like that. So it's like, as part of
look at my Facebook.
It's part of as part of that living amends. Hey, you have access to everything. You can look at it anytime you want. Like we talk about my journal. Like you can look at it anytime you want. I just ask that you ask me. You know what I mean? So, and part of the reason I do that is because it just slows you down enough to be like, hey, is there something going on that you want to talk about that you're a little nervous about?
Years ago, I would look at it a lot, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just, but you absolutely have access to everything that's going on in my life, without.
The third thing for making living amends is choosing difficult conversations over perceived comfort.
Mhm.
I'm going to say perceived comfort, because if you don't have the difficult conversations, there's the rocks in your shoes that we talked, I think, about in the last episode.
Right, right. Well, and once again, what making living amends being is you're there for her. You're actually there. You can hold her. You can be a container for that person when they're struggling. And so if and this may be harder for some than others, but through the process of healing, your empathy is growing. Those two things happen at the same time. And so what your spouse should see if she decides to stay is your ability to be there more, to be able to say, hey, I'm anxious, or hey, I'm not feeling good, right? So that there should be a change in your behavior as you move through the healing. And actually what people want to see, especially if they stay, and once again, you've asked me to kind of describe betrayal, but I'm going to kind of describe, maybe what my perception is of what a betrayed spouse wants to see. They want to see that person showing up differently. They don't want to see the exact same behaviors. They want to see the person that's willing to maybe turn the game off and have a conversation. They want to see the person that comes home maybe, from work on time and helps her out around the house when maybe they didn't used to before. They want to see the person that if you are sad and crying, that they'll hold you maybe more so than they ever did before. So you want to see, you want to notice that there's a difference. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's part of what that living amends is. And that's really hard. Like we talked about communication on the 4 things. This is hard too, because in a lot of cases, we don't see this modeled very well in our family lives. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, this is something that is a little bit harder to step into, but it's really important, because that's how you show up in the world, and are able to express your own feelings and help people express theirs. That's a really, really cool place to be.
Yeah. And I think I want to make sure we describe this in a way that, balance is the reality that it is a lot of hard work, and taking responsibility for a horrible thing that you've done does take a lot of work, and there is pain there, and it's the right thing to do. And beyond that, when you choose to do the right thing, you're creating a life that is good. You're creating a life that is full of integrity and authenticity. So there's an aspect to which, they say the best things in life are the hardest gained, right? Those types of things. And so it's like, I'm trying to balance the idea of, sometimes I feel like our episodes are like, it's hard work, it's hard work, it's hard work, it's hard work. And somebody can hear that right at the beginning and go, well, why even bother? Right? So what I'm trying to balance that with is the value in the end. You get to wake up every day and go, I'm doing what I say I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. I'm somebody that has integrity. I'm somebody that lives a life of authenticity. I've done a really bad thing, and I'm doing my best every day to make it up to the person that I love the most in the world. And again, 8 out of 10 times, that's going to lead to more empathy, more compassion, more softness from the betrayed partner. And the ideal healthy relationship is that 2 people lean in to understand each other more deeply. And even though you're going through something that's probably the most painful thing the 2 of you will ever go through, you end up on the other side with a completely different relationship, with more depth, more communication, more understanding of each other than you ever had when you had the skyscraper before. So you're rebuilding, but it started much lower. And so you have to start with foundation. That takes the bulk. It takes the majority of time. It takes the most pain to refill the hole. Then the rebuilding part, it's going to look like a totally different building, but a fancier one, a prettier one, a stronger one, whatever verbiage you want to think there that resonates with you. But I think people can get really stuck in the part of the rebuilding the foundation part, because that is the most painful. It does take the longest. It is the hardest. It requires the most effort between both people. And that can feel very discouraging for both sides. It can feel discouraging for the addict because he's trying really hard, and the betrayed partner just hasn't gotten to the place where she feels safe yet because it was a massive trauma. The betrayed partner can feel super frustrated because maybe the addict isn't expressing enough empathy, right? And so that part of filling the hole, I think, is where a lot of people get really, really stuck. And then max out at maybe ground zero, leveling it out, maybe, where it's I can tolerate this. I can, balance my life. I can manage things. And so what we're trying to communicate is if you keep going, yes, it's hard. All of these things are hard. Yes, it takes time. But if you keep going, then you start rebuilding the skyscraper. And this time you have all of the influence over the design, and it's something that the two of you make together. And, you know, you kind of put it back together, or not even back together. You're creating something brand new.
Right.
And so, I sometimes when we talk about things that are like really, really difficult, I just want to bring it back to that's the ideal end, though, is that you both get to show up really liking who you are as people, really being like, I like who I am today, and I like my partner, and I'm proud of my partner, even though I'm triggered today, or this has been a hard journey, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But it's like, I'm really proud of you, and you're really proud of me, and I'm really proud of myself, and, you know, you're really proud of yourself. And
well, and the whole notion of living amends, you don't live life in one moment. You live life in a multitude of moments. And so, you know, just because one moment you show up and or you express your emotion, and your betrayed spouse says, I don't really care about your emotion, doesn't mean that you don't keep going at it, right? Because that's what the living part of that is. It's, you know, you have to show up every day. You got to wake up every day and come in there. But over time, if you focus on being able to provide that gift of living amends to your betrayed spouse, you actually will see a change. I saw it. I remember actually thinking, when the questions were so hard early on and the triggers seemed really deep, you know, early on and whatever, like you never thought you get past it, right? And there was a moment, I don't know when the moment was, but it's in my own mind, it started to shift, and I was like, we're going to be fine. We'll get through this trigger. Like, and I don't know when that happened, but it was like, okay, yep, got it.
We'd like gathered enough proof that we'd move through.
Yeah, that we'd move through it. So you'll be okay. You know, it may be hard or whatever, but we're going to get through this, and it'll be fine. So that was just, I think that's the impact of being able to kind of, and here's the crazy thing that y'all got to remember too. It's like, you don't have experience moving through triggers until you experience triggers. And then once you get through it, then you go, oh, okay, well, how could we do that better? Kind of like the example we talked about with the work situation with me. We had never experienced that before. So now we did. And so that's going to govern the way I go about that and other situations in the future. It will actually help out in that way.
So I think to wrap this up, what I would leave people with is on both sides, the betrayed and the addicted side. If you're finding that you or the coupleship are getting stuck in communication patterns or trigger patterns or the same type of behavior, and it's frustrating to you and you're not feeling like you're making progress in some way, even if it's slow, but if you don't feel like you're on the right trajectory, then if one of you is in healing work and the other is not, it might be time to kind of step into that. Or, you know, the two of you working with individuals to help you answer these questions, because sometimes it's just helpful to even hear what you're experiencing at this phase in this month after discovery is normal.
Right.
Or what you're feeling right now as somebody who's super excited about being sober and then your wife is super mad at you is normal, but also you have to work through that and be empathetic because you have to remember she's traumatized. So as humans, we all have a tendency to be very selfish and self-focused. And through recovery, like all of our demons are going to come up, every single one of them, every individual weakness, every individual trigger, every flaw that we have as an individual on both sides is going to come out because this is hard. And so that's where being around people that have been through it and talking to people that can help you navigate it and just have done the reconciliation process with their spouse is going to be so helpful, because you get that affirmation, you get that wisdom of people going, what you're experiencing is normal. Maybe think about communicating it this way next time, or we've been there, but I want you to know that we're on the other side of that now. And that's par for the course at, month 9, that's very, very normal where you're at, and it'll keep getting better. Right. And so being in support groups, working with someone, a coach or a practitioner or a therapist that can help you specifically with these things can be really, really helpful. And so we definitely encourage everyone to pursue that. And there's always links in the show notes too, for if you need to pursue some of that support.
Right.
Well, we will see you next week. Thanks for joining us today. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.